Throughout our lives, people will inevitably disappoint us many times. Sometimes these individuals may be our closest friends or even family members. Our hearts urge us to maintain goodwill and forgive them. But is it really wise to keep forgiving those who repeatedly make the same mistakes and let us down? Stoicism brings awareness, teaching that forgiveness is not always a virtue, and that we must protect ourselves from being repeatedly harmed. Forgiving people who constantly disappoint you can sometimes mean compromising yourself. Forgiveness does not always bring peace. On the contrary, it can cause you to remain stuck in the same cycle. This video explains why setting boundaries with people who disappoint you is a necessity and outlines the fundamental reasons behind when forgiveness is warranted. If you find yourself in a constant cycle of disappointment, this video is perfect for you. Let's explore ways to protect yourself and find inner peace. Repeated betrayal makes you feel worthless. When someone you value disappoints you for the first time, it's merely a hurt. But when you are subjected to the same betrayal repeatedly, it should serve as a wake-up call. Stoics acknowledge that human nature is prone to error, but if mistakes keep happening, it's not just the other person. It's time for you to reflect, because a person's nature consistently reveals who they are and what they value. The actions of a betrayer are not just a momentary weakness, but a reflection of some darkness within them. Waves crashing against a rock only wet it at first, but as they continue, the rock starts to erode. Betrayal is the same. Repeated betrayals wear down a person's sense of trust and self-respect. Seneca reminds us of this truth. Everything that happens outside of us is beyond our control. However, how we respond to the actions of others is entirely within our control. Continuously giving chances to someone who betrays you contradicts the Stoic understanding of virtue. Virtue involves not only being forgiving to others, but also maintaining self-respect. While forgiveness may seem like an act of mercy, allowing that mercy to be continuously exploited damages one's self-worth. When Seneca says, "Act according to your nature," he emphasizes the importance of knowing oneself. When forgiving a betrayer, one may struggle against their nature. If a betrayal inflicts deep wounds on the soul, reopening that wound repeatedly is not a virtuous act. Rather, it is an injustice toward oneself. Is forgiveness always a virtue? According to Seneca, no. Forgiving means giving someone another chance. But if this chance results in them repeating the same mistake, then virtue cannot be claimed. It's like a gardener who keeps watering a rotting tree. It will never bear fruit, and the gardener's efforts will go to waste. A wise gardener, on the other hand, prunes the decaying tree and redirects their energy toward fruitful ones, thereby enhancing the beauty of the garden and valuing their labor. Not forgiving a betrayer doesn't mean harboring anger or seeking revenge. A Stoic sage knows that refusing to forgive is not a tool for revenge, but an act of understanding the person's nature while preserving one's inner peace. When someone disappoints you repeatedly, it is a sign of their character, which you cannot change. However, you have full control over the role this person plays in your life. Inner peace is shaped by how you respond to external events. If someone continually violates your boundaries, it is your responsibility to protect those boundaries. A wise person breaks this cycle and recognizes that nature does not change. They set the necessary boundaries to protect themselves. Every person walks their own path, and sometimes these paths may conflict. Not forgiving someone means stepping away from their path, allowing them to continue on their own while you carve out your own. This is wisdom because a wise person has the ability to act independently of others' actions while preserving their inner peace. Lastly, not forgiving a betrayer should not fill your life with resentment and anger. On the contrary, it represents the will to set boundaries against those who add no value to your life. Those who know their worth learn to close the door to people who violate their boundaries. According to Stoic teachings, this is one of the finest examples of wise behavior. If no one respects you, it's not because of them, but because you have not shown respect for yourself. The truth is, betrayal is not just the damage inflicted by a friend, but also a test of how much you value yourself. Passing this test means not allowing your boundaries to be crossed, for when they are, you lose your inner peace. A gardener works diligently to make the flowers in their garden bloom. But if animals constantly intrude and trample the flowers, the gardener's efforts are in vain. Just as a garden is fenced, the soul, heart, and mind should be protected by boundaries. Stoicism teaches that one must set boundaries in life to preserve inner peace, as a soul without boundaries becomes a vulnerable space subject to anyone's interference. Seneca's wise words remind us that the soul is like a fortress, our most valuable possession, for it is the only refuge from the chaos and disorder of the outside world. However, for this fortress to remain strong, it must be surrounded by solid walls. These walls are our boundaries, the invisible barriers that protect personal space, self-respect, and peace of mind. If someone keeps violating your boundaries, the fortress starts to weaken, cracks form, and eventually it crumbles. When people in your life overstep your limits, it is akin to a breach in your fortress, and each violation erodes your peace, leaving you feeling vulnerable. Every act of disrespect against your boundaries chips away at your mental framework, while every betrayal creates a fissure in the walls. In such situations, Seneca advises that it is one's responsibility to protect their mental fortress, as it is the most crucial sanctuary against the chaos of the external world. When defining your boundaries, you express what you value and who you are. Those who don't respect your boundaries serve not you but themselves. Their actions reflect not only upon you but upon their character. According to Seneca's teachings, if someone repeatedly violates your boundaries, it is not just a sign of their disregard for you, but also an indication that they do not respect their own inner world. Those who cannot control their behavior cannot be expected to respect others. Forgiving someone who violates your boundaries does not bring peace. Instead, it grants them more space, like allowing an intruder to repeatedly enter your fortress. Each violation weakens you further, eventually leaving you completely defenseless. Yet boundaries are essential elements that protect one's self-respect and mental balance. If you don't set these boundaries, others will, guiding you as they please. This is why Seneca argues that we must have the power to define our own limits. Boundary violations usually start as small disturbances, a word, an action, or neglect. Over time, these disturbances accumulate, creating deep fractures in your inner peace. However, many people don't immediately realize their boundaries are being violated, as these transgressions happen gradually, like a drop continuously eroding a rock. Boundary violations slowly drain your spirit until one day you find yourself insecure, indecisive, and anxious. Inner peace is built as a refuge from the noise of the external world. But if you don't protect your boundaries, this peace quickly turns into inner turmoil. At this point, Seneca says, "The only thing that renders you defenseless is not setting boundaries," illustrating how one should guard their soul against external dangers. If you don't define and protect your boundaries, others will invade this space and eventually drag you into their own chaos. However, a Stoic sage is one who clearly defines and defends their boundaries. Setting limits with the people around you is not about excluding or alienating them. On the contrary, these boundaries are the foundation of healthy relationships. Because every person has a personal space, and this space protects their mental health. If someone constantly violates your boundaries, you need to reassess your relationship with them. A life without boundaries drifts like a boat amidst the waves. If a person does not define their limits, they lose control of their life. In conclusion, protecting your boundaries is a reflection of safeguarding your inner peace. No matter how close people are to you, your boundaries are vital to your soul. Wisdom advises you to establish your limits and defend them resolutely, because boundaries offer protection, not just against the outer world, but also for your inner world. When you try to be perfect for them, you might think that forgiveness is a virtue. You may argue that it promotes peace or ensures harmony. However, I ask you to first reflect on a more important question. Why do their actions have such power over you? Disappointment doesn't stem from what someone does, but from the expectations you place upon them. Expecting others to act according to your desires is like willingly taking on a burden, and who but a fool would carry such a load throughout life? Still, I'm not suggesting we remain rigid and unyielding. A wise person, like a thin reed, bends but does not break when the winds blow. Yet, there is a significant difference between the enrichment that comes from being adaptable and the exhaustion that arises from constantly trying to please. The former enhances our character, while the latter depletes it. So, we must ask ourselves this question in the arena of life. For whom are we donning the armor of perfection? Is this not a fragile shield of glass, easily shattered by the disappointments we strive to avoid? True strength does not come from an unbreakable fortress, but from the resilience to stand firm with our flaws. Imagine a garden where every flower strives to be a rose, and any natural form that displeases the gardener is feared. How monotonous and unnatural such a scene would be, right? The beauty of a garden lies in its diversity, in the interplay of colors and forms, in each plant staying true to its own nature. Similarly, the fabric of human relationships is enriched not by pale imitations of what others desire, but by authenticity. Now you might say, but what if I change myself? What if I cannot be perfect in their eyes? Herein lies the problem. The idea of shaping yourself according to someone else's expectations is a betrayal of your own nature. What is this perfection you seek? Is it to please the person who disappoints you? Or is it merely a mask built to hide the unrest you feel? How fragile such a thing is. A piece of clay molded into a shape that someone else desires. While in doing so, you lose parts of yourself every time. You can walk cautiously, take careful steps, and weigh every word and action to avoid upsetting the one who constantly disappoints you. But don't you see? With every step, your true self drifts further away. The more you try to avoid their disappointment, the more you disappoint yourself. You begin living not as a free man, but as a slave, not bound by iron chains, but by the invisible shackles of expectations. The Stoic way teaches us that to live in harmony with nature is to live in accordance with reason and our true essence. Every person has an inner core, a guiding principle within. Our actions, thoughts, and desires should stem from this inner nature. So why give up your freedom for temporary approval? Would you surrender the reins of your soul to someone who doesn't even know how to govern their own? This is not perfection, but self-betrayal. Moreover, striving for perfection to please others comes at a great cost. When you try to be perfect, you live in constant anxiety. You are no longer free to act spontaneously or in line with your principles. Every word, every action is calculated, weighed on the ever-changing scales of another's standards. What do you gain from this effort? Perhaps a brief moment of approval, but disappointment will inevitably return, as this was never about your actions but their own inner dissatisfaction. If people consistently disappoint you, if they constantly trap you in a cycle of expectations and demand perfection, this is a form of spiritual enslavement. According to Stoic philosophy, constantly forgiving in such a relationship means disregarding your own nature. If a person cannot be perfect for themselves, then striving for perfection for someone else is the greatest injustice you can do to yourself. The saddest truth is that while pursuing perfection to please others, we lose the imperfect beauty of our authentic self. As you can see, their dissatisfaction is not a reflection of your inadequacies, but a projection of their unrealistic expectations. Just as an archer aiming too high misses the target, others also miss when they expect you to achieve what they themselves cannot. You should not strive to meet these illogical standards, as they will only trap you in a cycle of doubt and anxiety. At the core of Stoic philosophy is the preservation of inner peace, the cultivation of a mind undisturbed by external forces. However, if you constantly try to shape yourself according to someone else's desires, how can you hope to maintain this peace? Each time you compromise your nature, you compromise your inner tranquility. It is like trying to build a house on shifting sands. No matter how solid the foundation, if the ground beneath is constantly moving, it will always be unstable. Yet the person who lives according to their own nature stands firm. They understand that mistakes are part of life, that no one can be perfect, and they accept this truth. When they err, they correct their course. When others disappoint them, they do not subject them to impossible standards. Instead, they set boundaries, clear, firm boundaries that protect their inner peace. This brings us to the topic of forgiveness. Stoicism does not teach that we should allow others to walk all over us or forgive those who persistently disappoint us indefinitely. Rather, we should set boundaries. Forgiveness can be a noble act when done wisely, but when it turns into a cycle of continually allowing harm, it ceases to be virtuous. Instead of endlessly forgiving, set boundaries and protect your peace. You don't have to please everyone. nor should you compromise your values to avoid disappointing others. As the Stoics taught, true freedom comes not from living according to the changing demands of others, but from living in accordance with your own mind and principles. So, when faced with someone who continually disappoints you, remember that the problem may not lie in your actions, but in their expectations. Don't bend yourself to fit their desires, for by doing so, you betray your nature. Live by your own principles, walk your own path, and establish boundaries that will preserve your inner peace. True freedom is not found in the approval of others, but in the harmony of a steadfast soul in the face of disappointment. In the end, we have little control over how others treat us, but we have full control over how we respond to them. Constant disappointment is not just a mirror reflecting the faults of another, but also a sign of how clearly we have defined our own boundaries. Don't let others steal your freedom by shaping you according to their expectations. Life is much more than how others wish to see you. Staying true to your values is the cornerstone of inner peace. Setting boundaries with those who constantly disappoint you is not about withholding forgiveness. It is a wise step towards self-preservation. And remember, Stoic wisdom is not built upon the dissatisfaction of others. True wisdom lies in preserving your own inner peace and sense of self. Now I ask you, how do you establish boundaries in your relationships? Do you believe that forgiveness is always the right choice? Share your thoughts with us. Until the next video, stay stoic and remain strong.